Hello, friend. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Whether you've had a long day or simply need a gentle place to rest your thoughts, this time is for you. No rush, no pressure. Just calm company and quiet stories from a world long past. Before we get started, take a moment to let us know you enjoy our stories and want more by liking and subscribing to our channel. We thank you. Now let us begin. Tonight, we'll take a slow walk through the ancient world, not through the marble palaces or the roaring arenas, but through the soft, sunlit heart of everyday life, the marketplace, past baskets of figs and bread warm from the oven, past gentle prayers and whispered barters. We'll find gods hidden in plain sight, not in thunder, but in footsteps, not in battles, but in trade, travel, and trust. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the day fall away behind you. This is Gods at the Marketplace, the everyday divinity of ancient commerce. Let's begin, before the sun has even kissed the tops of the tiled roofs. The marketplace stirs, not loudly, not suddenly, but like breath entering a sleeping chest, quiet, steady, inevitable. In a small Roman town, nestled within the folds of the countryside, a simple square begins to come alive. The Forum Venalium, the open-air marketplace, rests beneath soft shadows, its cobblestones still cool from the night. The air is damp, not with rain, but with the heaviness of early morning. Dew gathers on the canvas awnings tied between wooden stalls. A breeze whispers through them, lifting corners, nudging folds. Like a mother gently waking a child, there is peace here, and purpose. A young boy, perhaps 10, walks barefoot along the edge of the square. He drags a bundle of twigs, his broom across the stones, collecting yesterday's dust and olive pits, the shed leaves of herbs, the frayed ends of rope. His movements are slow, not out of laziness, but care. His father's spice stall will open soon, and it must look clean. He pauses to peer at a fig that's fallen from a crate, its skin split, its sweetness humming with flies. Gently, he nudges it into the pile of sweepings, then moves on. Somewhere nearby, a door creaks open. Wooden shutters are pushed back with a soft thud. A woman leans out to shake a cloth, a gray-beige square that puffs and floats like smoke before settling on the stall's table. She wears no jewelry, no painted cosmetics. But her motions are precise, habitual, sacred in their own way. In the quiet, even these small sounds become music. The dry scrape of a broom across stone, the snap of linen pulled taut, the hollow clink of clay amphorae set upright, the distant bray of a donkey in a side alley. This is no grand city, not Athens, not Rome, not Alexandria, but it doesn't need to be. In towns like these, scattered across the Roman Empire, life moved with the sun and shifted with the seasons. The gods were present, yes, but not only in temples, not only in marble. They lived in bread ovens and fountain basins, in fig baskets and inkwells, in bronze scales and worn sandals. And nowhere was their presence more quietly constant than here, in the market. By now, more shutters open. A potter arranges jugs with curved handles on a table covered in straw. He rubs each one with a cloth, polishing the glaze until it glints like honey. Beside him, an older man kneels to hammer a loose nail in his cart. He grunts as he shifts, his knees cracking like dry twigs. Across the square, the fishmonger arrives last. He always does. a burlap sack slung over his shoulder, heavy with today's catch: bream, sardines, a single eel writhing against the cloth. He whistles as he walks, tuneless but cheerful. His dog trots behind, ears perked. The boy has finished sweeping. He sits now, cross-legged, beside a crate of spices, cinnamon curled like scrolls, saffron in thin orange threads, dried bay leaves brittle with scent. He chews a date and watches as the square fills, not in a rush, but like ink spreading on parchment. Two old women shuffle in, baskets looped over arms. One wears a faded tunic. The other walks with a stick carved from olive wood. They do not speak at first. They do not need to. This has been their rhythm for decades. A farmer arrives with a donkey cart, bundles of fresh leeks, bundles of herbs tied with twine, still glistening with morning mist. He lifts them carefully, laying them onto his stall like a painter preparing pigments. Somewhere near the center of the market stands a small wooden post. It is plain, save for the carving of a winged sandal nailed near the top, a symbol of Mercury, or if you were Greek, Hermes, the god of commerce, of travel, of roads and coin purses and speech. Few stop to pray aloud. There are no incense burners here, no loud invocations, but nearly every vendor touches the post. Just a finger, a breath, a habit formed in childhood. And every customer, whether they know it or not, walks beneath Mercury's gaze. What did it mean in ancient times to believe in gods like Mercury or Hermes? It did not always mean worship with fanfare or sacrifice. It meant trust, quiet trust. Trust that the roads would remain open, that ships would reach port, that coin would flow like water, not flood, not drought, just enough. Children arrive now, darting between stalls. They play with wooden toys, wheeled carts, straw dolls. A girl with a braid wrapped in blue ribbon tugs her mother toward the sweet vendor. She wants honey cakes. She always does. A man with a clay tablet under his arm takes notes on olive prices. His tunic is clean. His sandals are stitched in fine leather. A merchant, or perhaps a banker. He nods to the fishmonger. No words exchanged. They've dealt together for years. By mid-morning, the square hums softly, not with noise but motion. There is no shouting, no rush. This is not a market of luxury or spectacle. It is a place of survival, of routine, of community. Bread is weighed, wine is sampled, eggs are traded for wool. A young man barters for sandals. He has only half the coin. The seller shrugs, agrees. Pay the rest next week. A child's laugh rings out. A woman wipes her brow with her sleeve. A dog sleeps under a table. And above it all, always, the gods watch. But not from marble pedestals or high clouds. They are in the rhythm, the breath, the ordinary. As the sun climbs, the shadows shrink. The square is warm now. The boy returns to the spice stall, handing his father a cloth to mop his brow. The figs have sold quickly. So have the dates. Only 2 small jars of cumin remain. The woman across the way leans on her elbows, watching the crowd. She mutters, "May Mercury be kind today," then adjusts her scales, checking the balance. They tilt ever so slightly. She fixes them with a pebble, nods in satisfaction. No one would write about this market in a grand history. No scroll would record the names of the vendors. No busts will be carved for the boy with the broom. But here, in the stillness between transactions, in the hush before the crowd thickens, we see what history often forgets, that divinity lives in simplicity. that routine is a kind of worship, that to exchange fairly, honestly, with dignity is an act of sacred trust. And so the market awakens, not with horns or triumph, but with breath, with bread, with sunlight creeping across stone, and with a god, quiet, winged, unseen, walking slowly between the stalls, guiding hands, weighing scales, listening, always listening. Let us walk beside him. Let us follow deeper into the day. As the marketplace awakens and sunlight gathers in golden pools across stone, there is someone else here. He does not arrive with ceremony. He does not make his presence known with trumpets or incense or titles. He simply walks, light of foot, wreathed in dust and breeze, unseen but deeply felt. This is Hermes. To the Romans, Mercury. But to the everyday people of Greece and Rome, he was many things. To the vendor counting coins under a linen awning, he was a god of commerce. To the boy delivering a message on a wax tablet, he was a god of communication. To the woman tying up her traveling shoes for the journey to the next town, he was the god of roads. But Hermes was more than a patron of things. He was a presence, a rhythm, the gentle pulse beneath the ordinary. Picture him now, not in the grandeur of Olympus or wrapped in mythic armor, but here, in the market. He is young, eternal, but not ancient. His sandals are dusty. His eyes glint with wit, but also something warmer, understanding, curiosity. He walks past the olive vendor and watches her barter with a soldier. He hears the quickening heartbeat of a nervous apprentice giving change. He watches a girl slip a small coin into her mother's purse without a word. He smiles. He does not intervene. He simply observes. Hermes was not a distant god. He was not only summoned by oracles or priests. He lived in the moment someone risked a journey. He guided the tongue of someone trying to speak a truth. He blessed the small gamble of a handshake, a deal, a shared glance. In the Greek world, Hermes was born of Maia, a mountain nymph, and Zeus. But even as an infant, myth tells us, he was already walking, already exploring, already making mischief. Yet the people who honored him in towns like this did not picture him as a trickster god of chaos. They saw him as a guide, a clever friend, a guardian at the edges of the known world. The god who walked with merchants, who whispered to travelers, who opened the way forward. In the Agora of a Greek polis, the space would be open and flat, framed by porticos and stalls. Men debated philosophy under shaded colonnades. Pottery clinked. Bees drifted toward honey stalls. Youths tossed pebbles between their sandals as they waited for their fathers to finish bargaining. But if you listened closely, the rhythm of their day, the exchange of ideas, of goods, of movement, was all watched over by Hermes. His image was often carved into the boundary stones of the market. These Herms, simple pillars with the god's head and a mark of masculinity, were placed at thresholds, between roads, between city and countryside, between silence and speech. To step past one was to acknowledge that you were moving into a space guided by Hermes, that the rules of the world just shifted slightly, that something important, however small, was about to happen. We tend to imagine the gods in lofty places, thrones, altars, mountaintops. But Hermes was always at the edges, where people met, where money changed hands, where words were spoken and carried. Picture now a Roman version of this same scene. The Macellum, a Roman marketplace, bustles with quiet routine. Vendors under wooden roofs sharpen knives. Children squabble over sweet treats. A scribe with a wax tablet leans against a pillar, scratching notes with a stylus. And in a shaded niche along a wall, someone has tucked a tiny statue, perhaps of bronze, perhaps just clay. Winged sandals, a curved staff, the caduceus, a sly smile. It is Mercury. Someone has left a coin at the base, another, a sprig of rosemary. A traveler pauses, lifts 2 fingers to his lips, then to the statue. A silent request. Watch over my path. Protect my purse. Let this trade go well. To most, it would appear a superstition. To others, simply a habit. But to the ancients, this was relationship. This was dialogue with the divine. Not in grand, booming voices, but in gestures, in footsteps, in trust. Hermes' staff, the caduceus, is often mistaken today for a medical symbol, but its true meaning lies in its structure. 2 serpents coiled around a central rod. Balance, harmony, negotiation. The staff represents more than medicine. It speaks to Hermes' role as a mediator between gods and humans, between silence and speech, between the known and the unknown. In the marketplace, every trade, every negotiation was a mini ritual of that balance. Imagine now a soft exchange. A woman is selling dyed cloth, shades of crimson and sea blue. A man from a distant port wants to buy. They don't speak the same tongue, but Hermes, god of language, hovers between them. Gestures are made, smiles shared, cloth is touched, a price is agreed upon. Both nod, and silver changes hands. That was Hermes' miracle. Not thunder, not war, understanding. He is not just god of movement. He is the reason movement matters. Because it brings people together. Because it changes what is known. Because it expands the world. Even thieves, oddly, honored Hermes because he understood risk. He understood boldness. He understood the tension at the edge of action. And so, even those outside the law whispered his name, not for blessing, but perhaps for luck. By midday, the market has changed. The light is higher, the square louder. Hermes walks still, not bound by walls, not confined to altars. He sits, perhaps, with the boy learning his first barter. He follows the messenger threading between carts. He nods to the baker handing a free loaf to a widow. And everywhere he goes, he watches not for devotion, but for connection. For the ways people reach across difference, across space, across silence. Hermes does not announce himself. He does not linger. He walks with the wind, with the coin, with the word. He is the space between dash dash and the guide within it. So the next time you walk, the next time you speak, the next time you offer something of value to another, you may not see him, but Hermes is there. As the market swells with sound and sunlight, a quieter corner waits in shadow. It is easy to miss, tucked beside a crooked column or behind a curtain of olive branches. But if you linger, if you listen, you'll find it. A shrine, small humble, worn smooth by time and by touch. It isn't grand, it isn't gilded, but it is sacred. A carved figure rests within, a likeness of Mercury or Hermes, depending on the tongue of the land. His face is barely visible now, the features softened by decades of weather and reverence. He stands with his signature symbols, the winged sandals, the traveling cloak, the caduceus held lightly in one hand. The wood is cracked, the paint has flaked away, and still, he watches. Beneath him, laid with intention, are offerings. A cluster of coins, small, copper, weathered, each placed with care. A cake, browned at the edges, crumbling slightly. A sprig of myrtle, still green, still fragrant. Nothing extravagant, nothing showy, but each item means something to someone. Each is a whisper. Each is a message sent upward or inward. A woman approaches. She is older. Her steps are slow, wrapped in ritual. She carries a small pouch tied at her waist. Without a word, she kneels. She pours 3 drops of wine at the foot of the shrine, then rests her forehead against the pillar. She does not speak. She doesn't have to. The gesture is the language, and Hermes, the god of language, understands. In ancient households, people had many gods. Lares for the home, Penates for the pantry, Genius for the spirit of the family. But in the world beyond their doors, in the places of travel, trade, and chance, people turned to Hermes. They did not always ask for wealth. They asked for safety, for guidance, for clarity in decisions. Offerings reflected that intimacy. A token of bread, a coin before a journey, a whisper before a risk. These were not grand rituals of empire. They were not dictated by priests or choreographed by ceremony. They were daily, personal. They were as quiet as hope. Elsewhere in the square, a child is pressed forward by her mother. Her tiny hand holds a honey cake wrapped in cloth. She walks slowly to the shrine and sets it down beside the others. For a moment, she looks up at the carved face. Her mouth opens. She says something, inaudible, then runs back to her mother's arms. Perhaps she asked for her father to return home safely. Perhaps she offered her thanks for the sandals she wears. Perhaps she simply wanted to be seen. The ancients believed in signs, omens, not as predictions, but as conversations. A bird flying left instead of right. A cart's wheel breaking at a crucial turn. A coin found face up beside the shrine. These were not mere accidents. They were Hermes speaking back, not in words, but in nudges, in patterns, in disruptions. To live with the gods was to live with attentiveness, with awareness, with interpretation. Picture now the spice merchant, late in the morning. He has sold much, but he watches the last customer closely. The woman hesitates, haggles slightly, then overpays by a single coin. She does not seem to notice, but the merchant does. He smiles and touches the small wooden amulet of Mercury hanging near his stall. He will leave that extra coin at the shrine when he closes. Why? Because sometimes the gift returns. Sometimes the god smiles. And sometimes the smallest abundance, unexpected, unasked for, is a kind of answer. In wealthier cities, shrines were more elaborate. Carved niches in marble walls, terracotta statuettes painted in rich colors, oil lamps burning even at midday. but the meaning never changed. It wasn't the size of the offering, it was the sincerity. Even travelers left signs. Outside city gates, wayfarers placed pebbles at crossroads, small stacks to mark the path. Some painted them with ochre. Some tied ribbons of cloth. Some placed a coin beneath the largest stone, unseen to all but Hermes. In doing so, they left behind a piece of their journey, a record of movement, a marker of trust. What does it mean to believe that the divine accepts your crumbs, your broken cake, your smallest coin? It means your worth is not measured in gold. It means the gods are close. It means your voice, however small, is heard. In the far corner of the market, beneath a woven canopy, a man reads from a scroll. He is old. His beard is silver, his hands ink-stained. Children gather to listen. He speaks of a time Hermes stole Apollo's cattle, of how he made the first lyre from a tortoise shell, of how even the great gods could be charmed by his cleverness. The children laugh. But one girl, quiet, watching, asks, "Did he ever lie?" The old man nods. "Yes, but he never broke a promise." That was Hermes. Witty, quick, complex, but ultimately loyal. He was not perfect, but he was present. And in a world where roads were long, where trade could turn, where messages were lost or misunderstood, presence was everything. So we leave the shrine behind. The offerings rest where they've been placed. The candle flickers low. The cake crumbles slowly, but the meaning remains. Each gesture, no matter how small, joins the great current of quiet faith that has flowed through markets, roads, and thresholds for thousands of years. And somewhere, beneath the noise of the crowd, Hermes listens, always. As the day stretches long and the shadows of awnings lean toward the east, a quiet question begins to form. Where, truly, do the gods dwell? Is it in the grandeur of temples, stone columns rising high into a cloudless sky, or in the tilt of a vendor's scale beneath canvas and dust? Are they found in gold and incense, or in the soft voice of a woman blessing her bread before she sells it? Let us begin at the top. In the city center, a grand temple stands, its marble clean and gleaming, the stairs worn by years of footsteps. It is dedicated to Mercury. Priests in white tunics move softly across the atrium, their sandals barely brushing the stone. A bronze statue watches over the sanctuary, winged, noble, immortal. Oil lamps flicker. Sacred scrolls are tucked neatly in alcoves. A shrine of coins gleams in the golden light, attended to with care. This is the temple, the holy place, and yet it is mostly still, mostly quiet, mostly distant. Now, shift your gaze. Walk with me, not upward but outward, away from the city's heart, back to the market, to the stalls, to the smells, to the mess of real life. There, amid rough wood and calloused hands, Mercury lives again. A woman sells onions. She has no priesthood, no temple wealth, only her stall, her onions, her dignity. Each morning, she lights a small oil lamp for Mercury. It is set behind her baskets, partly hidden. She touches it twice, once before opening, once before closing. She does not call it prayer, but it is. A child trips in the street. A man steadies him. The child smiles. The man moves on. No one names the god in that moment, but he is there, because the divine, in its oldest, simplest form, was presence. You see, to the ancients, there was no barrier between sacred and mundane. There was no separation between the temple and the stall, between priest and porter, between offering and action. If anything, the market was its own temple, its own ritual space, its own dance of fairness and risk, honesty and trust. The seller who gives fair weight to her olives, the trader who honors a handshake without written word, the messenger who walks 50 miles to deliver news with nothing but a name. They are all part of this temple, not by title, but by practice. Mercury's temple may have echoed with chants, but his presence was loudest in the click of coins, the scratch of quills, the soft grumble of barterers working toward peace. And there is something humbling in this truth. The gods did not demand perfection. They asked for sincerity, not ceremony, but connection. In the grand temple, worshippers came in robes, clean and careful, but in the market, they came in linen worn thin from labor, in sandals patched 3 times, with sun-darkened skin and dirt beneath their nails. And Mercury welcomed them just the same. Imagine now, 2 men arguing over a goat. The price is too high, one insists. The other defends the animal's health, its strength. Voices rise, hands move. A small crowd gathers. But then, something shifts. One offers a slightly lower number. The other pauses, then nods. They clasp forearms, seal the trade, and step away with smiles. No temple, no altar, but the god has been honored. Because peace was found, because exchange was fair, because both walk away, feeling seen. Later in the day, the priest from Mercury's temple walks through the market. He buys bread, he buys figs, he stops at a cloth stall to admire the dye. He is not here as a priest, he is here as a person, and in doing so, he completes the circle. The sacred has entered the mundane, and the mundane becomes sacred. Let us pause now. Let us sit at the edge of the square, under the shade of a tree. Watch as the market breathes, vendors laughing, children darting between legs, elders sipping watered wine. Each face carries a story. Each hand has offered something. Each step has brought them here. And somewhere, unseen, Mercury smiles, because he was never only a god of gold. He was a god of movement, of connection, of the invisible threads that tied people to each other, to place, to purpose. When the sun begins to dip low, the market does not stop. It softens. Stalls are packed away. Wool is folded. Fish is salted. Hands are wiped clean. Coin purses are checked one last time. And then, one by one, candles are lit. Not for light, but for thanks. Some thank the gods aloud. Some only nod. Some say nothing at all. But in every gesture, there is worship. In every quiet exchange, a temple. Because the temple was never just marble and incense. It was trust. It was fairness. It was the small kindness that made the day possible. And so, the question lingers. Where do the gods dwell? They dwell in both places. In the temple and the stall. In the ritual and the rhythm. In the sacred and the simple. And as the last merchant walks home beneath the stars, coin pouch lighter, shoulders sore, heart steady, he passes the shrine at the edge of the square. He touches the post with 2 fingers. Then, with his breath, he whispers, "Thank you." And somewhere, carried on the breeze, Mercury answers, "Thank you for walking with me through the warm stone paths of the ancient marketplace, through the quiet gestures, the gentle trades, and the hidden places where the gods waited, not in thunder, but in the movement of everyday life. If you take anything with you from this journey, let it be this: the sacred is not far away. It is close, woven into your daily motions, in the words you choose, the exchanges you make, the paths you walk. The ancients didn't just look for the divine in temples. They looked for it in kindness, in fairness, in the courage to speak, and the humility to listen. Perhaps Mercury still walks with us, not in winged sandals, but in every quiet connection we share. If this story has brought you calm or helped you rest, I'd be honored if you joined me again. There are many more slow journeys ahead, many gods still waiting in quiet places. Feel free to subscribe or simply return whenever you need a peaceful corner of history. Until then, sleep well, walk gently, and may your road always lead you where you're meant to go. Welcome back, traveler. You've wandered through the open squares and market stalls of the ancient world. You've seen how the gods walked among merchants, whispered between handshakes, and moved gently through the rhythm of commerce. But now, let us return home. Not to the homes of legend or marble palaces, but to the kind you'd find on any Roman street. A modest dwelling, terracotta tiles overhead, clay walls, cool to the touch, the smell of baking bread, a simmering pot, olive oil and ash, and within these walls, something sacred, not enshrined in marble, not guarded by priests, but kept quietly, beside the fire, a shrine, a flame, a presence. Long before empires were built on marble columns and imperial conquests, long before names like Augustus and Nero were etched into the bones of time, the heart of Rome beat quietly in its homes, not in the Senate, not in the temples, not even in the sacred forum, but here, beside the hearth, where a small flame flickered, guarded by spirits unseen, but deeply felt. The Lairs and the Penates, they weren't gods of conquest or command. They didn't reign from mountaintops or demand armies of worship. They were guardians of the grain jar, protectors of the family table, spirits who watched over the tears, the laughter, and the rituals that defined the quiet rhythm of life. They were there when your child took their first steps, when your partner fell ill, when the wind howled at the windows in winter. They stood in silence, waiting, watching, welcomed each morning with whispered words and simple offerings. You didn't need a priest to speak to them. You didn't need a sacred calendar. You needed only the spark of memory, the comfort of routine, the stillness to say, "You are with us, and we remember." Some said the Lairs were ancestors, spirits of those who once sat at the same table, wore the same sandals, whispered the same blessings. Others believed they were guardians of place, spirits of the land, the home, the very walls that sheltered you. But all agreed. They were present, and their presence was power. Not the kind that commanded temples, but the kind that steadied your hand, warmed your food, and watched the door when someone was late returning home. They didn't roar like Jupiter. They didn't strike like Mars. They stayed. They listened. They held vigil. The Roman pantheon was vast. There was Jupiter, sky ruler, wielder of lightning and fate. Mars, god of war, red and hungry. Venus, dazzling and distant, giver of beauty and desire. Apollo, with his golden lyre. Diana, silent among the trees. Their temples were immense, their worship public, their power elevated and formal. But to the average Roman, to the woman baking bread, the boy sweeping the floor, the elder pouring wine at dusk, those gods felt far away, honored, yes, but distant. So Rome, in its quiet wisdom, gave the people something else, something closer. Gods who lived not in the clouds, but in the kitchen, not in the heavens, but in the pantry. Their names were Lares and Penates. The Lares came first. Their origin was ancient, older than the empire, perhaps older than Rome itself. Some believed they were once the souls of the dead, ancestors returned not to haunt, but to guide. Others said they were nature spirits, born of the land, tied to place. By the time the Republic had risen, they had become something very particular. Lares familiares, the protective spirits of the household. Each home had its own, sometimes one, sometimes many. They were usually pictured in pairs, youthful, barefoot, graceful, holding offerings, sometimes dancing, symbols of joy and sacred continuity. They stood watch at the lararium, the household shrine, their gaze gentle, their purpose eternal. They didn't demand much, just to be remembered. And in return, they remembered you. The Penates were quieter still. They weren't tied to the doorway or the dead. They were tied to the table. They were gods of the pantry, of storage, of sustenance. They watched over flour jars and oil amphorae. They ensured the bread rose, the wine fermented, the meals satisfied. They weren't spoken to in desperation. They were thanked in plenty. When the cupboard was full, the Penates were smiling. When it was bare, you offered what little you had and asked for help. Their presence was comfort, a sense that no matter how lean the times, the home still had its soul. Together, the Lares and Penates formed the spiritual backbone of Roman domestic life, not by law, not by decree, but by love, by memory, by tradition. They weren't bound to altars of stone, but to shelves above the hearth, to the quiet corners, to the worn places touched by generations of hands. Their temple was the home, their ritual, daily life. Worship of the Lares and Penates didn't require spectacle. There was no public priesthood, no sacrifice of bulls or oxen, no oracles. It was simpler, more sacred because it was so human. A libation in the morning, a piece of bread, a whispered name, a candle. Children learned to bow their heads without fully knowing why. Women learned to tend the shrine as they did the fire, gently, reverently. And men learned that the strength of a home was measured not in stone walls, but in the care offered to the spirits within. There was no script, only rhythm. No commandments, only continuity. And in that rhythm, something profound emerged, a sense that no one truly lives alone, that the walls have memory, that the floorboards carry footprints of those who came before. The lairs and penates reminded Romans that the divine isn't always above us. Sometimes it's beside us, in the flicker of a flame, the warmth of a dish, the breath before dawn, the hush after nightfall. They reminded the Roman people that a home is more than shelter. It is a temple of care, of memory, and of presence. And so, every morning, before the city roared awake, a man would light a lamp, pour a little wine, place a fig or a flower or a piece of honey cake on the household altar, and remember, he was not alone. His father had done the same, and his father before him, and one day his child would kneel in the same place and do the same thing. And the Lares and the Penates would still be watching, still protecting, still waiting for the next morning, the next breath, the next flame. Every Roman home, from the humblest cottage with a dirt floor and open roof to the noble villas of marble and mosaic, held a sacred space. It may not have seemed like much to the outsider. Sometimes it was little more than a wall niche, a shelf tucked near the kitchen, or a small alcove carved into stone. But to those who lived there, it was everything. It was the lararium, the spiritual heart of the home, a doorway to the divine, a place where the gods weren't thunderous forces shouting from Olympus, but familiar companions, neighbors, watchers, guardians, friends. The lararium was not just decoration. It was a living altar, a place of connection, presence, and remembrance. In poor homes, it might have been a single clay statuette, a faded image scratched onto a tile, a bowl of ash where incense once smoldered. In wealthy homes, it became more elaborate. A small cabinet, painted with deep reds and ochres, golden leaf curled along its edges. Inside, statuettes, crafted in bronze or terracotta, stood side by side. Two youthful figures, the Lares, one central image, either the genius, the divine spirit of the family's male head, or Vesta, goddess of the hearth. Sometimes both. They stood in harmony, protectors of continuity and firelight. Above them, frescoes might show snakes, not symbols of fear, but of fertility, health, and homebound protection. Serpents that crawled through the dust unseen, but always near. The Lares were usually shown dancing, joyous, celebratory. They held drinking horns, rita in one hand, and sometimes libation bowls in the other. Their posture wasn't stern. It was alive, vibrant, watchful, yet welcoming. They were never depicted as rulers. They were family. The lararium, no matter its size, was sacred. It wasn't placed high on a mountain or hidden in a forest cave. It stood right where you lived, where you cooked, slept, raised children, and grieved. It was, almost always, near the hearth, that elemental center of Roman life. Because the hearth was not just warmth. It was memory. It was lineage. It was the fire of survival passed down from generation to generation. And at its edge, the gods stood, ever present, ever quiet. Every morning, just before the light fully broke, the ritual began. The paterfamilias, the male head of the household, would rise early, often before the rest of the family. He would walk barefoot to the lararium. He would pour a small libation of wine or milk, sometimes honey, sometimes even oil. He would murmur a few words, no long orations, no complicated chants, just a simple greeting, a blessing, a thank you for another day. Sometimes he would touch the lararium with his right hand. Sometimes he would light a small candle or burn a sprig of incense. Children were taught to observe, to be silent during the ritual, not out of fear, but respect, because this wasn't performance. This was participation. On certain days, the ritual would be more elaborate. A birthday, a journey, a wedding day, a safe return from war, the day a child took their first steps or spoke their first words. Each of these moments became sacred pauses, and every pause returned to the lararium. Prayers were offered, tokens were placed. Sometimes the entire family would gather and take turns giving thanks. Even slaves, if trusted and included in the household, might be invited to observe, because the Lares and Penates were not just gods of the powerful. They belonged to the home and everyone who lived under its roof. Offerings were simple: a piece of bread, still warm from the oven, a cluster of grapes, a few olives, a bit of pork if there was meat that day, always accompanied by wine or water, sometimes a flower or herb, sometimes a family token, a charm, a polished stone, a coin, not for wealth, but as a gesture of memory. Some families passed heirlooms through the lararium, an item blessed by the gods before being given to the next generation. The offering wasn't about value, it was about intent. Even the smallest crumb could carry meaning, if offered with sincerity. The lararium was also used in moments of fear. When illness came, when an animal fell sick, when war loomed on the horizon, when a letter from a faraway loved one failed to arrive. The family would return to the shrine, sometimes in silence, sometimes in tears, sometimes just to sit and be near it. The flame would be lit again. A hand would rest near the figures. No words were needed, because the Lares were not gods of answers. They were gods of presence. In Roman culture, there was a belief that everything in the home had its proper place, its proper time, its proper ritual. And nowhere was that more embodied than in the lararium. It was untouched by casual dust, always cleaned, always respected. Children were taught never to mock the shrine, to never shout or run near it, and to never forget that the gods within it were watching, but not in judgment, in care. Sometimes the lararium would be used to mark the passing of a family member. A candle burned for many nights, an item belonging to the departed placed inside, their name spoken aloud for several days in a row. The family would eat their meals with one plate left empty, symbolically offered to the spirit of the departed, and in this way, the Lares received new company. The dead became protectors of the living, and the living remembered that they too would someday stand in the flame's glow, not as mourners, but as memory. In many ways, the lararium was more than just a shrine. It was a mirror, a reflection of the family's rhythm, fears, hopes, and continuity. It reminded everyone, daily, that they were part of something greater than themselves. Not a republic, not an empire, but a lineage, a story, a spiritual ecosystem that reached backward to the ancestors and forward to the unborn. The flame connected them all. Today, we rarely pause to bless the cupboard. We rarely thank the air that fills the hallway. We forget the sacredness of the broom, the bed, the bread. But the Romans did not forget. They wove the divine into every corner, and nowhere was that more apparent than in the lararium. A place small enough to hold in a child's arms, yet vast enough to hold generations of love. So if you were to ask a Roman child where the gods lived, they might not point to the sky or to the temple across town. They might take your hand, walk you to a quiet alcove by the fire, and show you a flame dancing between two figures. They might say, "They live here. These are our lares. They keep us safe." And that child would not be wrong. Each day in a Roman home began not with haste, but with ritual. Not with the clamor of business or the banging of tools, but with the careful, quiet gesture of reverence. A flicker of flame, a word murmured at dawn, a gift left in silence. This was how the Romans spoke to their gods, not through grand spectacles or mighty sacrifices, but through rhythm, through routine, through love. The rituals offered to the lares and penates were not elaborate, but they were essential. They stitched the day together like thread through linen. They marked time. They marked belonging. And above all, they marked gratitude. The most common offering was the libation, a small pouring of wine, milk, or water. At dawn, the paterfamilias, the head of the family, would take a shallow bowl. He would fill it just enough to glisten in the light, and with a few whispered words, he would tilt it gently at the base of the lararium. Sometimes he would kneel. Sometimes he would bow. But always, he would remember. These libations were a form of conversation, a check-in with the divine, a simple way to say, "You are seen, you are honored, you are welcome in this home." In addition to libations, Romans gave food, a crust of bread, a sliver of cheese, a spoonful of honey. It was not about the quantity. It was about the gesture. Even on lean days, a family would find something, however small, to offer. Fruit when the harvest was good, herbs from the windowsill garden, salted fish or olives. And when a new food item entered the home, a fresh wheel of cheese, a jar of oil, a new loaf, the first bite was sometimes placed at the shrine, not to sacrifice it, but to share it, to say, "We have received, and now we give." Incense, too, played a vital role. The smoke that curled and danced in the air was said to carry prayers, to open a path between the mortal world and the spirit world. Romans burned incense made of frankincense, myrrh, or local herbs. It was sometimes placed in a small dish at the foot of the shrine, or waved gently before the figures. The smell became part of the home's identity, like the smell of the hearth, the bread, the family itself. And in times of illness or uncertainty, incense was lit, not just as offering, but as comfort, a way of cleansing, of soothing, of saying, "Be near us." But the rituals of the Lares and Penates were not limited to mournings. They marked milestones too: a birth, a marriage, a departure for war, a return from travel. Each of these moments was acknowledged at the Lararium. Before a son left for military service, the family would gather. The father might place a small token of protection at the shrine: a coin, a charm, a scrap of his son's childhood tunic. The mother might whisper a prayer. The sisters might light the flame together. And the Lares would be asked to watch over him, to walk with him. And when he returned, if he returned, the family would gather again, this time in joy. And the offering might be more generous: a full cup of wine, a cooked meal shared in silence. Because gratitude in Rome was not loud. It was full. It was felt. And the gods received it in the quiet way they gave. Protection was also a key part of these rituals. Though the Lares and Penates were gentle, they were powerful. They guarded doorways. They guarded thresholds. They guarded the spaces between what was outside and what was within. During times of plague, war, or famine, families leaned harder on their household gods. Prayers became more frequent, flames burned longer, and special offerings were made: a bowl of water left overnight by the hearth, garlands of dried herbs, symbols painted near the entrance. Some even created temporary household charms, small dolls or carvings wrapped in cloth and blessed by each member of the family. These were placed at the Lararium until the crisis passed. Children were taught early on how to participate, not through dogma, but through practice. A daughter might learn to light the incense. A son might be asked to pour the libation. These rituals became part of the rhythm of family life. They taught reverence. They taught mindfulness. And they created an invisible bond between child and parent, between home and spirit, between life and memory. There were no grand rules, no official calendar for these rites. But there were traditions. Many homes honored their Lares on the kalends, the first day of each month. Others observed festivals like the Compitalia, a public celebration of neighborhood Lares where offerings were left at street shrines. During Saturnalia, the boundaries relaxed, and offerings to the Lares might include sweets, pine garlands, or little clay figures. But even in celebration, the tone was gentle. The Lares did not demand spectacle. They asked only for remembrance. Sometimes families personalized their shrines: a small carving representing a departed ancestor, a token from a marriage or a birth, a pressed flower kept from a beloved journey. The Lares accepted these too, because they were not strangers. They were companions. In time, even those who had no memory of the original ancestors still kept the flame, still poured the wine, still said, "Thank you." Because tradition is its own form of prayer. These rituals did not end when a family moved. The shrine was carefully packed, the ashes from the hearth preserved, and in the new home, the first act before anything else was to rebuild the Lararium, to place the figures, to light the flame, to let the spirits know, we are here, and you are still with us. This continuity was sacred. It wove identity through space and time. And whether the home was in Latium or Gaul or distant Britannia, the Lares followed. Even now, in the ruins of Pompeii and Herculaneum, archaeologists uncover loraria, some still painted, some still holding the ashes of incense, some with the tiny footprints of time pressed into their clay. They are not monuments. They are memories, the kind that whisper even now. This was a home. This was a family, and we were loved. Not all spirits in the Roman home were gods. Some had once been human, flesh and breath, just like you. They had walked these floors, touched these doorways, sung lullabies in this same kitchen, and when their lives ended, they did not disappear. They became presence. They became memory. They became the genius. The genius was not a ghost. It was not the spirit of the dead in the way we often imagine. Instead, it was the guiding spirit of the individual, particularly the paterfamilias, the male head of the household. It was thought to be born with him, to shape his destiny, to grow as he grew, and to watch over the family through him. But more than that, the genius became a vessel for continuity, because when the father passed away, his genius could be honored still. It could live on, not in fear, not in grief, but in reverence. In every Roman family, the bonds between generations were sacred. They were more than genealogy. They were spiritual. The father was not just a provider. He was a custodian of the household spirit, a channel between the past and the future. He honored the ancestors and prepared his children to do the same. And through the genius, this cycle became visible. The genius was often represented at the lararium, standing between the lares, garbed in a toga, right hand extended in a gesture of offering. He looked like a man, but he was more than a man. He was what lingered after, what gave structure, what passed wisdom through time. It's important to understand how deep this reverence for ancestors ran. Romans did not speak of the dead with finality. The dead were not gone. They were simply moved to a quieter room in the same house, to a shadowed place beside the fire. In some homes, ancestral masks were kept, called imagines. These were wax effigies, carefully molded during a person's life or shortly after death. They were kept in cupboards or wall niches, only taken out on special days, funerals, family rites, or days of remembrance. And when they were brought forth, they were honored, carried in solemn procession, displayed during rituals, sometimes kissed. They were not trophies. They were portraits of presence. And even when the masks faded, the names remained. Genealogy was memory, and memory was sacred. Children were taught the names of their ancestors. Not just grandparents, but great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents. The line stretched backward like a vine, interwoven with myth and identity. To forget an ancestor was to lose a piece of the self. And yet, even for those who had no masks, no noble lineage, the idea of familial presence endured. Simple families might honor their dead with a stone near the hearth, a flower placed each year on the same date, a whispered prayer before a journey. Because the home was not just a shelter, it was a vessel of souls, and each family member, living or dead, was part of its story. When a child was born, the genius of the paterfamilias was invoked. When a daughter married, she left the protection of one genius and entered another's. When a son came of age, he performed a ritual called the toga virilis, the donning of the man's toga, and with it, he stepped into spiritual independence, his own genius awakening to guide him. Women, too, had their counterpart, the Juno. Every woman had her own Juno, a guardian spirit akin to the genius. The Juno was linked to fertility, wisdom, and the sacred rhythms of womanhood. Though less formally celebrated in public rites, she was deeply honored in the home. On her birthday, a Roman woman might offer a prayer or small gift to her Juno, a cake of grain, a flower, a soft word of thanks, because in Rome, every soul had a twin spirit, a divine mirror, a sacred echo. So when a Roman family gathered at the lararium, they were not just honoring the gods, they were honoring themselves, their past, their future, their essence. The genius stood beside the Lares, not above them, but among them. He was not thunder or flame. He was memory. He was wisdom. He was the breath passed from father to son, from mother to daughter, without ever leaving the room. In times of decision, the genius was consulted. Should we plant now or wait? Should the boy be apprenticed to the potter? Should the daughter marry into that family? A pause at the lararium, a cup of wine, a hand on the wall, and always a feeling, a stillness. The genius did not speak with words, but in Rome, silence was often more trustworthy than speech. Even the emperor had a genius. Across the empire, you could find public altars to the genius of Augustus, later to the genius of the emperor, a way of folding political loyalty into religious life. But for the average Roman, the true power of the genius was never imperial. It was personal. It was the way a father looked at his son, the way a mother held her child, the way a family stayed tethered across time. And when a man died, his genius did not simply vanish. He was honored again. His image at the lararium remained. His name was spoken aloud on festival days. His favorite food might be placed before the flame. And each time his children lit the incense, they felt him there, not as ghost or shadow, but as warmth, as rhythm, as part of the breath that moved through the walls of the home. Today, few of us speak of the genius. Fewer still keep ancestral shrines in our kitchens, but the feeling remains. When we light a candle beside an old photo, when we tell a child a story about someone long gone, when we whisper a name before making a choice, that's the genius. Still there, still guiding, still woven through the quiet corners of our lives. Life in the Roman world was rarely still. Merchants followed the rhythms of trade. Soldiers marched across distant provinces. Families migrated to new lands, some for opportunity, others for survival. From the ports of Ostia to the frontier roads of Britannia, Rome pulsed with motion. But even when the body moved, the spirit did not wander aimlessly. For every family that left behind a home in Latium or Etruria, one thing always traveled with them: their gods, their lairs, their penates, their fire. And with these, a sense of rootedness, no matter how foreign the soil. In times of relocation, the hearth was the first and last place a family turned. Before departure, families would perform a rite of parting. The pater familias would kneel before the lararium. He would offer wine, a coin, perhaps a tear. The mother might wrap a small vial of ashes from the hearth in linen, tucking it into the family's belongings. Children might carry a small figure of Alar in their traveling satchel. Each step of the journey was blessed not just with hope, but with memory. Because to the Roman mind, the gods were not left behind. They were invited along. In a new home, whether a villa or a wooden barrack, the lararium was among the first things reassembled. Sometimes it was built of fresh clay. Sometimes a niche was carved into a borrowed wall. Always, the ashes from the previous hearth were sprinkled in the new fire. Always, the first offering was made with care. And always, the words were spoken. You are still with us. This ritual was more than tradition. It was identity. It was the invisible thread that made a foreign place home. Military families understood this deeply. A Roman legionary stationed in Egypt might write home asking for a token from the family shrine. A wife left behind in Hispania might keep the lararium flame lit in her husband's absence. When a soldier retired and was granted land in a distant province, he would often recreate his entire lararium from memory. And for those too far to bring physical remnants, a prayer whispered to the wind was still a thread between places. For in the Roman heart, the divine was not just powerful, it was portable. Even in the darkest transitions, plague, exile, or loss, Romans clung to their household gods. There are stories of refugees fleeing natural disasters with nothing but their lararium figures wrapped in cloth, of families whose homes were razed, yet they rebuilt, beginning again with flame and altar. In these moments, the Lares and Penates were more than spirits. They were anchors, a reminder that the sacred was not in stone walls or city gates. It was in relationship. It was in memory. It was in the act of keeping faith, even when all else was lost. Colonists, too, carried their gods abroad. When Roman citizens were sent to establish new towns or military colonies, they did not arrive empty-handed. They brought bricks and tools, yes, but also ashes from a previous hearth, figurines of ancestral lares, incense and libation bowls, and in these newly founded cities, long before forums and aqueducts, shrines were built. Sometimes they were public altars at crossroads. Sometimes they were private niches in kitchens. But always, they were familiar. Always, they said, this is still Rome. Even enslaved people, denied freedom and often displaced by force, practiced quiet forms of remembrance. Some created miniature lararia in secret corners. Some whispered the names of their household gods before sleep. Even without physical objects, the ritual lived in gesture, in breath, in longing. For while Rome conquered land and bodies, the human spirit clung to what it knew. And so the Lares survived even in exile, even in silence, to move the body and keep the soul intact. This was the quiet miracle of Roman spirituality. Wherever the empire stretched, from desert to forest, island to plain, there were always footprints of the household gods, in stone, in ash, in memory, because the sacred did not ask for permanence, only for presence. When the sacred moved, it did not diminish, it adapted. It found a place at every new hearth. It whispered in every strange wind. And even now, centuries later, the relics remain. A household altar in Britannia, an incense bowl in Gaul, a painted Lar figure in Syria. proof that for the Romans, home was not a place, it was a practice. And wherever they carried their flame, the gods were already waiting. The city of Rome has long since faded into dust and empire. Its marble columns have fallen. Its senators are silent. The fire of Vesta is no longer lit. But if you look closely, you can still find them. The Lares, the Penates, the quiet ones. Not in loud monuments, but in the overlooked corners, in bits of painted plaster, in faded frescoes, in ashes beneath collapsed rooftops. In these delicate remains, the story of Rome's most personal gods continues to whisper. Across the ancient city, archaeologists have unearthed over 100 Lararia, each a window into Roman intimacy. In Pompeii, frozen in ash, there are shrines still intact. Some are etched into garden walls, some painted with deep ochre, with dancing lares and graceful serpents twined at their feet. One lararium has bowls still resting on its shelf, as if the family had only just stepped outside, still holding the smoke of a morning prayer. In Herculaneum, a carved wooden cabinet survived, rare and blackened, containing the figure of a penate nestled beside a wine jug. These are not relics of temples or conquest. They are evidence of daily life, of presence, of care. What's most touching is the individuality of each shrine. There was no universal blueprint, only familiar rhythm. In some homes, the Lares are youthful, radiant figures in flowing garments. In others, they look older, bearded, stern, perhaps mirroring the family's own patriarchs. Some Lararia feature Venus or Mercury or local river gods, showing how Roman families blended state religion with local traditions. And often, next to the divine, archaeologists have found earthly things: a child's toy, a sewing needle, a small worn sandal. Tokens not of worship, but of relationship. Remnants of lives once lived in faith and warmth. Many of these shrines were found not in grand villas, but in modest homes, the back kitchens of tradesmen, the garden corners of weavers. This tells us something profound. That reverence was not a luxury. It was a habit. And whether rich or poor, people carved out space, physical and emotional, for gratitude, for memory, for the sense that something was watching over the flame. In the ruins of shops, even taverns, lares compitals, guardians of the crossroads, have been discovered. They were painted near doors or placed beside counters. Offerings were left not only in homes but in alleyways and street corners. A figel mesteto, a pinch of grain, a few drops of wine. The line between sacred and ordinary was so thin in Rome, it was almost invisible. Today, when we walk through the ruins, we are walking past ghosts, but not haunting ones. These are benevolent spirits, the kind who stayed behind not out of sorrow, but out of love. In every corner where a lararium once stood, something lingers. It is not just the soot, not just the pigment, but the gesture, the intention. A Roman family once stood here in silence, offering thanks. Modern historians still debate the origins of the Lares and Penates, whether they come from Etruscan roots or older Italic cults. But in truth, their magic lies in how long they endured. They were never the focus of grand myths. They did not appear in epics, but they outlived emperors because they belonged to the people, to the kitchens, to the bedsides, to the thresholds. And even as Christianity swept through Rome, Remnants of their presence lingered. Early Christian households still marked corners of the home for blessings. They lit candles at dawn. They kept relics of ancestors. The language changed, but the impulse did not. In rural Italy today, there are echoes still. In the way some families keep a small corner for saints. In the habit of lighting a candle when a child leaves for school. In the practice of blessing the home with olive branches during festivals. These are not Roman rites, but they carry the same heartbeat, a whisper across time. To study the Lares and Penates is to study not power, but intimacy, not conquest, but care. It is to see a civilization not only through its wars and monuments, but through its warmth, its faith in the small, in the everyday, in the sacredness of presence. And so, the next time you light a candle, or leave a place at the table, or speak softly to a memory, you are not so far from Rome. Not the Rome of emperors and legions, but the Rome of hearths, of hands, of homes, where the flame still flickers and the gods still listen.